Hi, Dr. Flannelly. It's truly a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
You've built an extraordinary career for nearly 4 decades in the pharmaceutical industry, shaping the commercial success of some of the world's most impactful medicines. During your tenure at Incyte, you also played a pivotal role in establishing myeloproliferative neoplasms, the MPN field, as a recognized and influential therapeutic area within the pharmaceutical industry. And now you continue contributing your leadership as an independent director at Pharma Essentia USA. Welcome.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So you're joining the board in Pharma Essentia drew a lot of attention from both scientific and investment field. Those investors and scientists, they are so interested about you. Okay, so today I'm very excited to explore your journey from the early career choices to your view of the future MPN field. So you've held leadership in multiple major pharmaceutical company through your 38-year leadership and career in pharmaceutical industry. And I noticed that most of the roles you participate are in sales and marketing. In Taiwan, most of the PhD and PharmD students or graduates, they continue their careers in R&D. Fewer to choose a commercial side of the business. So why you choose these paths originally, or is there any experience or mentor that influenced your decision?
Yes, well, I really started as an oncology pharmacist working in, Johns Hopkins Oncology Center, which was a great foundation in the first place for pharmaceutical industry because I met so many doctors who were going through their residency and fellowships in oncology that then went out into the world, not just through the United States, but throughout the rest of the world. So I had a connection with them when I did enter the pharmaceutical industry. I entered the pharmaceutical industry in medical affairs, which is where you do have lots of physicians, PharmDs, PhDs, sometimes nurses. That was great, but I got invited to move inside. This was for Rhone Planck Rohr a long time ago, and do scientific communications, which is you focus on publications, data review, data generation. But it also meant that every publication, every abstract, every poster had to come through me on the drugs that we were studying at the time. And I became an expert, particularly on our lead product at the time, which was Taxotere, which went on to get approved in 8 different indications. So the marketing team essentially saw me as the expert on the product, at least within the United States, and maybe, honestly, for a very small oncology company at the time. So they wanted to see if I would come into marketing. So yes, I had a couple of mentors. One was Mark Allis, who went on to be CEO of Celgene, and then Hervé Hoppenot, who went on to be CEO of Incyte, and they encouraged me to move into marketing. I took over the breast cancer franchise, and then I took over as vice president of marketing, and then vice president of sales, even though I never sold, actually. So just because they thought I could do that, and I was very passionate in my presentations and my defense of our products and the promotional messages that I would create. So it was natural for me. Maybe it's not natural for everybody, but in my career, actually, I did encourage PharmDs, sometimes PhDs, to come onto more of the commercial side. Plus, I mostly insisted when I did get into leadership positions that I would be in charge of not just the sales and marketing organization, but also the medical affairs organization as well, because I think it's very important to have those teams all work in concert together to better serve the customers, both the patients and the healthcare professionals.
So because of that interdisciplinary experience, so really helped you later in your career to, to combine the science and business side of
Absolutely. The Especially with oncology. I mean, in primary care medicine, maybe it's not as important. I think it's important in every area of the pharmaceutical industry, but particularly in oncology, you better know the disease. So when you're talking to academic thought leaders who are experts in hematology or oncology, you better know what they're treating. So that's an important part of it. And then, of course, you better know your drug, and you better know the competition. So the pluses and minuses of your own drug, but also what the competition is trying to say and communicate. And if you can argue against perhaps their positioning better because you understand the science, because you understand the disease, it absolutely helped me in my career. And I believe it's very important. I actually believe that people come from a scientific background. Their ability to grow within the pharmaceutical industry and become leaders is a lot easier, in fact, if you're an MD, PhD, PharmD.
Understood. So they can understand the market better.
That's right.
Okay. So before joining Pharma Essentia, you've spent more than a decade in Sight. Okay. So that company truly transformed the MPN treatment area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you were part of the incredible journey of Jakafi,
Mm-hmm.
and that become one of the most, or I shouldn't say one of, it is the most important treatment for myelofibrosis and
Mm-hmm.
later on polycythemia vera.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this incredible product now can collect, I should say, ruxolitinib well over $3 billion revenue a year. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So from your perspective, so what lesson that you learned from that product, ruxolitinib, can reflect to Pharma Essentia's flagship product, Besremi,
Mm-hmm.
in global expansion in their sales?
Well, one of the things that was very important, obviously, Jakafi getting approved in myelofibrosis was a major breakthrough. And in polycythemia vera, where Besremi is in the first line setting, honestly, it's the emphasis is really on what are you really doing for the patient. The patient doesn't necessarily see that their blood counts are normalized. What they experience is symptoms. So they experience night sweats, pain, fatigue. So if you can manage those things and emphasize those things to the patient and the healthcare professional, then in fact they want to use your drug more or stay on the drug because now they're getting relief of those symptoms. Same thing for Besremi, to find exactly the benefit that the patient is experiencing. And in polycythemia vera, they can do that because, in fact, Besremi does relieve those same symptoms. And in ET, essential thrombocythemia, it is, at least based upon the phase 3 studies, it will provide the same relief of symptoms, but also control their blood counts. So in fact, they don't end up having blood clots because their platelets and their white blood cells are accelerating so much. So it's really finding the benefit that the patient is really getting from the drug and communicating that to them, and then of course to the healthcare professionals. The other thing was, when we got the second indication for Jakafi in polycythemia vera, it actually helped myelofibrosis. It actually helped to increase that because now the same doctors who are treating myelofibrosis and polycythemia vera, they see the drug works in both settings, so they feel more comfortable about using it perhaps earlier in myelofibrosis. I think the same thing will happen with Besremi, is that when they have an indication in ET, which they'll be the only drug approved in that setting, first and only in 30 years. So I think it'll give physicians who are treating NPNs more confidence to use it in PV more than they're currently doing today. So both indications help to grow the product.
Understand. That's very interesting. As Besremi received the FDA approval back in 2021 for polycythemia, I can imagine there must be a lot of awareness of Besremi is coming in the MPN community. Okay, so that probably also prompts some internal conversation about how could that new therapy, which means Besremi, to change the MPN or to influence this field. So back when you were back in Insight, okay, so had you aware of this upcoming new treatment?
Oh, absolutely. We knew it was being studied. We knew it was going to be approved, and we even met with the team at one point back in 2015 and 2016. But because Besremi got a first-line approval, Jakafi was approved in the second-line setting, we weren't really concerned about it, whether the patient was coming off of hydroxyurea or maybe eventually off of Besremi, they would still go on to Jakafi. So we didn't really see it as a threat. And in fact, I'm not sure. We had discussions about doing some collaborations where the drugs could be used together, and they could be used together, but it just never materialized. So again, because Besremi was being approved in the first-line setting, Jakafi was approved in the second-line setting, we didn't really see that it was truly competition, that it just might help the patients in the first-line setting, and if they did come off of the drug, then we would be there for the second-line setting.
Understood. Yeah. So during your time at Insight, we all saw that Jakafi get approved one after one indications. Myelofibrosis, polycythemia vera, and later on AGVHD, GVHD, and so on. And ruxolitinib now can treat vitiligo. Okay. So how do you see that kind of experience for the indication expansion that can give Besremi some of the instruction of the future of the product?
Just to clarify, the vitiligo is really the topical formulation of ruxolitinib. It's not taking Jakafi orally. You wouldn't do that. But it's sort of what I was saying at the last question that you asked me, is that the continued indications, one helps the other, because each of this, it's because it's the same healthcare professionals that are going to treat myelofibrosis, polycythemia vera, ET, and maybe, in fact, if Besremi gets approved for primary myelofibrosis, essentially earlier stage myelofibrosis, each indication helps the other, because, again, the same healthcare professionals that are using the drug see that, yes, this is one drug that I can use across all of my patients that I see. Often, what people don't understand is that in the hematology oncology community, particularly in North America, is that they see very few of these patients. The hematologist only sees perhaps one or two of these patients, because they see many more lung cancer patients, many more breast cancer patients, many more leukemia patients than they see of NPN patients. So having more familiarity with a drug because it has several indications makes them now
more comfortable.
More comfortable, but now more of their patient populations are using the same drug. So that's very important, because often it's the same for Besremi. It was the same for Jakafi. When you go to see somebody, they're just not as familiar with the endpoints of the studies, because they don't think about it every single day. Of course, there's experts at academic medical centers that focus just on MPNs, but a lot of the hematologists in the community are seeing many different diseases, and this is just one of them. So you have to remind them over and over again that, no, we can control their blood counts, and we can make them feel better at the same time.
So Besremi is expected to receive FDA's approval for ET in 2026. Okay, so this is a very important milestone, and also ET is an important area in MPN. So look at the landscape today. How would you evaluate the commercial or treatment potential of ET?
Oh, I think it's huge. I mean, there's at least 200,000 patients. There's 6,000 new patients a year, and obviously those patients over time will go on to perhaps be treated with hydroxyurea, and then they will eventually perhaps need something else. So Besremi has the market completely open to them for all of the patients who come off of hydroxyurea. I think it's a very good place to be in. And sometimes being in the second line setting is actually better because those are the patients that tend to be sicker. The first treatment they try, hydroxyurea, doesn't work for them or causes severe side effects. So now the only thing I'm going to be able to go to, quite frankly, is Besremi. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and like I said before, it'll help PV as well.
Right. Okay. So every success story also comes with challenges. So during a decade more of the tenure in Incyte, is there any challenge that you face in Jakafi or other products in development or commercialization? Can you share with us one of the story?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the big challenges was really that 3 other JAK inhibitors got approved at during my tenure there. And so whether it was going to be true or not, investors, analysts thought that our market share was going to be dramatically reduced because of these other JAK inhibitors that are now available. Quite frankly, I didn't believe that at all because of the profile of Jakafi was honestly so good that it was easy to identify the problems with those other drugs and to reinforce how good Jakafi was, that it made patients feel better. These other JAK inhibitors would make them feel, especially for gastrointestinal side effects, sicker. So we were able to work through that. The other challenges perhaps were when Jakafi tried to go into other areas like solid tumors. It's an experiment that was worthwhile doing, but did not work out. So investors were very down on our prospects for continuing to grow because now we were limited. We weren't going to be expanding into solid tumors like like colorectal cancer, for example, and lung cancer also. But it wasn't a problem. And this is how it perhaps relates to Besremi and Pharma Essentia, is that despite the fact that this other opportunity was now closed to us, we were going to continue to grow. And perhaps it wasn't going to be dramatic growth, but it was going to be double-digit growth year after year after year. And that eventually adds up to a $3 billion revenue every single year just in the United States alone. So same thing with Besremi is that they're going to continue to grow in polycythemia vera, and now this other big opportunity in ET will continue to grow. It's not perhaps going to be dramatic overnight, but it will add up year after year after year as the patients get used to the drug and then stay on the drug. And that's the important thing, is they can stay on it for a long period of time.
Right. So one follow-on question is related to what you just said. So after Jakafi was approved for myelofibrosis and polycythemia, Incyte became a very successful story in the capital market. Okay, so back in times like during your tenure, the market cap was reached well over $30 billion US. So you must have talked to a lot of investors and analysts. So in your mind, or from your perspective, how should the investor evaluate a company in development stage or growth stage? Because back then, some of the indication of Jakafi is still unapproved or under clinical trial. So how should an investor to really understand the hidden value of a company?
Well, just going back to the $30 billion market cap, that was really due to over-enthusiasm around immuno-oncology drug that thought was going to be the next big thing after the anti-PD-1s. So that really had nothing to do with Jakafi. But again, it was another challenge. Your market cap goes up dramatically, whether it was irrational enthusiasm or not. That's a challenge for the company to deal with. But what it really meant was that you go back to the basics, your main compound, and you make sure that you have everything in place to continue to expand awareness and utilization of the product in myelofibrosis and polycythemia vera. Eventually, Jakafi, as you said, got approved in graft versus host disease, which turned out to be another big plus. So for Besremi, for example, again, that continued double-digit growth year after year, it adds up, and the next thing you know, you're a blockbuster, and you continue to grow. So you have to just keep on convincing the analyst and the investor community that yes, we're still going to get there with our revenue projections, despite the fact that perhaps other drugs in our portfolio fail, because in oncology especially, but in the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, most drugs fail.
Right.
You're very lucky when you get a drug as good as Jakafi or as good as Besremi can be.
So before your appointment, Pharma Essentials board represents a very strong scientific background.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With your join, is that a hint, or can you see that transformation of Pharma Essentia from a biotechnology company into a fully integrated global pharmaceutical company?
I think, I think they already are on their way to be a fully integrated global pharmaceutical company. What I see here in Taiwan, the commercial group here, the commercial group in Japan, which I just came from, is very good. And then the team that the U.S. has in Boston are also very good. So you always have to add some more components, and I think they'll do that, particularly with getting ready for the ET launch, that you'll just look for more talent, both on the marketing side, perhaps on the medical side, perhaps on the clinical development side. So I think they're well on their way to becoming a global integrated pharmaceutical company. Hope that, they still have the science. I've met, wonderful MDs, PhDs that are working in discovery on new compounds and other indications for Besremi, like primary myelofibrosis, for example, that makes it really exciting. So the team's working together. You need to have, of course, it's great to have a great drug, but you do need to have, particularly a commercial organization, to break down the barriers. You have to know how to distribute the drug. You have to know how to make sure it gets paid for. You have to make sure you know how to support patients when they have challenges through whoever their payers are. So the commercial team has to make sure they do that. And they have to, communicate the features and benefits of Besremi so that all of the treaters of ET and PV understand that this drug can help their patients.
So basically, other than the product itself, you need an integrated team.
Absolutely.
To make an influence in the community.
Yes, we want to make sure that we have great scientists, but we also want to make sure that we have a team in place that can actually get the drug to the patients, and there is no barriers that will prevent that drug from helping them.
So because Pharma Essentia is the first Taiwanese company who has a wholly owned product to get US FDA approval and also market in the US, okay? Because of that, Pharma Essentia achieved the revenue that no other local biotechnology company can reach, okay? So based on that, many other smaller biotechnology companies, they are still struggling in their pipeline development or the funding challenges. What is your advice to those emerging biotechnology companies?
Well, everybody's having trouble. All small biotech startups are having trouble with funding. It's just the nature of the cycle right now of where the investments are going. So the advice is, for me anyway, is very simple, is that you really need to go after drugs, indications, targets that are first in class or best in class. And that's it. Having Me Too's in this marketplace when you're starting out, it's not going to cut it. So it's easy to say you want to be first in class or best in class, but you really have to only put your money behind and your resources behind going after those targets that are really going to impact patients. And if there's 3 other drugs ahead of you, don't bother. You used to be able to do that. in cardiovascular, working on cholesterol drugs or ACE inhibitors, for example. You'd have 6 or 7 or 8 of them on the market. You can't really do that anymore, and certainly you're not going to get any investment if that's what your strategy is.
Yeah. So in your board experience, what do you think is the key point that distinguish those companies that break through from those fades away?
Yeah, I think, if you have a great product, you're not going to fade away. Sometimes just a great drug, despite the efforts you might put in its way, a great drug is going to make it. So the companies that fade away generally don't have a good product, period. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay, so throughout your career, you have mentored or led a lot of professionals. Okay, so for younger generation talents, if they wish or they hope to pursue their career to become a leader in biotech or pharmaceutical industry, what's your advice to them?
Well, mostly you have to love the pharmaceutical industry, and you have to want to help patients that your drugs might serve. So you really have to make sure that you have a burning passion inside, whether you're discovering, developing, or delivering drug product. You have to make sure that you truly want to help patients get better. And I believe that's what the pharmaceutical industry does. And then you have to make sure you have to have a passion to help the healthcare professionals, because it's very difficult. Their job is very difficult. And you can help them by removing some of the barriers of getting the medications they want to use to their patients, so their patients are satisfied and they're satisfied. That's what I would tell, and I do tell, young people all the time. It's not about money. It's not about promotions. It's about you. Every day you get up, you have to figure out, how am I going to help another patient today?
Thank you so much for sharing your insight today. Your experience from advancing important therapies to helping shape how the industry understands complex diseases reflects not only strategic leadership, but also a deep commitment to patients. We truly appreciate the perspective you brought to this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. And as you begin this new chapter on Pharma Essentials board, many people in the industry, including our audiences, are eager to see how your vision and experience will help guide the company's continued growth. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to see the impact of your leadership in the years ahead. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.